A quiet night at the Grand Ole Opry. The lights dim. At the center of the stage, a single microphone stands, waiting for a voice that may never return. Backstage, an old man holds his guitar, head bowed, no spotlight, no applause. Because Bobby Bare has already walked through every blaze of glory. He is 90 years old, the last living soul of country's golden generation. A monument Nashville once tried to forget. Bobby Bare was never the brightest star, but he was the voice of the forgotten, the storyteller for the lost. For 6 long decades, he did not just sing of pain. He lived inside it. No scandals, no excuses. Only songs that bled quietly, like wounds beneath the skin. He once wrote, "I don't need them to remember my name. I just hope they see themselves in the songs I leave behind." From a starving boy in Ohio to a man unafraid to sing of failure of an America broken after war, Bobby's life is a ballad too heavy for anyone else to write. 3 broken marriages, 2 lost decades in silence, nights on the road, weeping alone in cold motel rooms. No one saw, no one heard, only the guitar knew. And now, as every monument around him falls, Bobby Bare still stands, quiet, defiant, carrying all the scars no one else can see. This is not just the story of a country singer. It is the final toll of a generation, the lament of a man who lost everything except his voice. Early life. Before he became country music's quiet monument, Bobby Bare was just a barefoot boy wandering the cracked earth of rural Ironton, Ohio. Born in 1935 in the lingering shadow of the Great Depression, Bobby grew up in a world where poverty wasn't a fear. It was simply life. His father died young. His mother, small but unbreakable, raised the children alone, taking any work she could with her hands. Dinner was often nothing more than cold bread and lard. Some winters, Bobby crawled into an empty potato sack just to stay warm. And if not for the old radio in the corner, whispering the lonely guitar of Hank Williams or the sorrowful voice of Red Foley, he might never have known what hope sounded like. He taught himself to play on a pawn shop guitar, cheap and battered. When a string snapped, he tied it back with fishing line. Each night he sat on the rotting porch steps, strumming harsh chords, imagining himself on a great stage, where the crowd would fall silent to hear someone finally tell their story. School never held him long. He dropped out of high school, too poor to pay tuition, and took any job he could, hauling stone, digging ditches, painting houses. But music never left his side. It was the one place he didn't feel invisible. And in those hard years came Bobby's first love. A girl named Linda, blonde hair, a laugh like sunlight in the late afternoon. She was the first to believe that the poor kid with the guitar might actually become someone. They loved in secret, meeting by the Ohio River at night, where only the water carried their promises. Linda once told him, "If Nashville won't take you in, I will." But in 1953, Bobby was called to work at a defense plant. Not the army, just a factory job. Rigid, repetitive, a sad song with no ending. At night, he held his guitar, humming softly, thinking of Linda, thinking of the dreams trapped between the cornfields and the machines. Then tragedy struck. Linda was killed in a car accident at just 18. Bobby never got to say goodbye, no farewell song, only a guitar and an emptiness that would never heal. They say after the funeral, he sat by her grave all through a stormy night. When he finally returned home, he wrote his first song, not to sing, but to keep a piece of memory alive. That song was never released, but from that night on, Bobby wasn't just a poor boy playing music for passion. He sang to survive. Years later, in a rare moment with the press, Bobby Bare admitted, "I didn't chase music, I clung to it, because without it, I would have drowned in silence long ago." The loss of his father, his childhood, and his first love shaped Bobby Bare into the man he became. Quiet, unadorned, never showy. But every word he sang cut deep, like a blade across memory. And that is why, when he sang, people didn't just hear him. They felt his soul. Early career. Before he became an icon, Bobby Bare was just another unknown, rejected by the very dream he was chasing. In the 1950s, when honky-tonk stages lit up across America, Bare, a poor boy from Ohio, wandered from town to town carrying nothing but a battered guitar and an unshakable belief that music was the only escape from the cycle of poverty and obscurity. But Nashville, with its dazzling lights and closed doors, was not kind to strangers. In a 1985 interview, Bare recalled, "There were nights I slept in my car, eating a 3-day-old sandwich just to save enough money to cut a demo." He began under a fake name, Bill Parsons, because the first record label he approached refused to use his real name. It wasn't commercial enough. His first song, The All-American Boy, was credited to someone else. The cruelest part? It became a massive hit, shooting up the Billboard charts. Bare earned almost nothing. Sitting in a cheap Texas motel, hearing his song on the radio under another man's name, he hurled the radio against the wall. "I knew I could write songs that moved people." But Nashville didn't know it, or didn't want to. The blow nearly broke him. He worked factory lines. He even considered enlisting in the army, anything to forget that damn dream. But in those darkest days, a friend handed him back his guitar and said, "If you walk away from music, you walk away from yourself." Bare returned, harder, sharper. He no longer chased fame. He wrote to release the bitterness inside him. His early songs were strange hybrids, part folk, part country, even a taste of rockabilly. Record labels didn't know what to do with him. "They couldn't put me in a box," he later said. And yet, while Nashville turned its back, America began to listen. The first man to truly believe in him was producer Chet Atkins, who didn't hear a star. He heard a storyteller, a drifter with the voice of the forgotten. Thanks to Chet, Bare signed with RCA. And in 1962, Shame on Me cracked the top 20. But it was Detroit City, 1963, that finally set him apart. A mournful ballad about migrant workers longing for home, for their mothers, for a country that had left them lonely. Bare's voice didn't try to please. He didn't sing to conquer. He sang like a man whispering truths others were too afraid to tell. No glitter, no show, just wait. Detroit City won him a Grammy in 1964, but instead of celebrating, Bare sat alone in a Los Angeles hotel room. He once confessed, "I remember turning on the TV, watching myself win, and all I wanted was to call my mother. But she had died the year before, so I shut off the TV, poured a whiskey, and wrote another song." From a barefoot boy hustling gigs to a Grammy winner who still felt empty, this was Bobby Bare's first journey. And it was only the beginning. Career success. When Bobby Bare slipped quietly away from Nashville's spotlight, many thought he had walked off for good. But his silence wasn't a farewell. It was the pause before a comeback that would make Nashville hold its breath. In 1962, Bare signed with RCA Victor under the guidance of Chet Atkins, the chief architect of modern country music. Chet understood what others had missed. Bobby wasn't just a singer. He was a storyteller, with eyes that had seen too much and a voice that didn't need to shout to reach the heart. And then came Detroit City, a song about a rural man lost in an industrial world, worn down by broken dreams and haunted by loneliness. Bear didn't just sing it. He lived inside every line, as if he himself had stood in Detroit, desperate to go home. The song was more than a hit. It became the voice of an entire generation of Southern migrants chasing work in the North. Then came 500 Miles Away from Home, Four Strong Winds, Streets of Baltimore. Each song was a fragment of America in the 60s and 70s, not rosy love stories, but delayed trains, cold houses, and half-finished romances on dusty highways. Bear no longer chased the audience. The audience followed him. In an era when Nashville preferred polished comfort after the war, Bear stood apart. He dared to sing what the city tried to ignore: disappointment, unemployment, children growing up without fathers. He wasn't fiery like Waylon Jennings, or glamorous like Glenn Campbell, or explosive like Johnny Cash. He simply told stories, half whisper, half sigh. And because of that, America listened in silence. By the mid-1970s, Bear changed the game again. He signed with Columbia Records, and in 1973 released Bobby Bear Sings Lullabies, Legends, and Lies, written entirely by America's beloved poet Shel Silverstein. The album was a declaration. Bear didn't need Nashville's permission anymore. He would build his own light, his own world, a place where music wasn't strangled by commercial chains. The record sold big, charted high, but more importantly, it proved Bobby Bear was an outlaw before outlaw country even had a name. Bear never called himself a rebel, but in his music was a refusal to be caged, from performance style to subject matter. He sang of forbidden truths, the rot inside the American family, the emptiness in sex, the weight of war, the cracks in morality. While Nashville tiptoed, Bear walked straight into the fire. From 1975 to 1983, he released a string of daring albums. Me and McDill, Drunk and Crazy, Down and Dirty, Ain't Got Nothing to Lose. Each one was a slice of America waking up from its pretty dreams. Bear sang of losers, but with a strange compassion, as if he could never mock another man's pain. By the late 80s, as new waves rose with Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson, Bear quietly stepped out of the mainstream, but he never vanished. He chose instead to become a living legend. No PR, no scandals, no staged comebacks. Then, in the 2000s, he surprised everyone. In 2005, he released The Moon Was Blue, produced by his son, Bobby Bear Jr. His voice was deeper now, but still warm, still achingly real. Father and son together carried America's story forward. Two generations, two ways of living, bound by one stubborn love for music. In 2013, he was finally inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, a late but rightful honor. And in 2018, at 83, he released Things Change, alongside longtime peers like Chris Stapleton. Nobody believed a man in his 80s could still sing like that, but Bobby Bear proved it. Music never grows old, so long as the heart still knows how to hurt. Controversy and tragedy. Beneath the dusty shirt, behind the faraway gaze of a Southern drifter, Bobby Bear carried more than songs. He carried scars no one could see. In the world of country music, painted with cowboys, whiskey, and tear-soaked love ballads, Bear walked like an outsider. He didn't want to be an idol. He didn't care about magazine covers. He only wanted to tell stories. But that very refusal often made Nashville eager to push him out of the circle of fame. Bear didn't fit the system. He refused formulas, he refused flashy suits, he refused safe songs. In a 1976 interview, he said bluntly, "I don't sing to comfort the audience. I sing to say the things people are afraid to say." Those words slam doors shut. A major DJ once declared, "Bear is a genius who can't be controlled," and as if cursed, his career was often left out in the cold of the mainstream. While his peers, George Jones, Conway Twitty, flooded the charts with hit after hit, Bear's songs were sometimes banned for being too dark. One station refused to play Marie Laveau because a song about a witch doesn't belong in the American family. But Bear's greatest tragedy didn't come from Nashville. It came from the solitude he built around himself. His wife, Jean Bear, once admitted, "Bobby could write 1,000 songs about sorrow, but he could never speak his own sorrow out loud. He brought home Grammys, awards, fame. Yet many nights he sat alone in the dark drinking whiskey, writing songs through tears." Fans loved him for those haunting ballads. They didn't know he wrote them while wrestling with depression, exhaustion, and a grief too deep to name. A close friend recalled, "There was a time Bobby disappeared from the stage for nearly 5 years. No warning, no explanation. He just said, 'I don't have anything left to say to the world.'" By the 1980s, Bear had almost vanished from country's map. People thought he had retired. The truth was harsher. He had broken inside. Sick of the industry's commercial lies, sick of betrayal, sick of failing as a husband and father. His children grew up with him often gone. Jean, the wife who had always stood by him, once packed her bags to leave for good. "You're not my Bobby anymore," she wrote in a letter she never sent. "You've become a storm of sorrow, and I'm not strong enough to live inside it." That was the moment Bobby Bear stood at the edge of the abyss. His career silent, his family fractured. Nashville turned its back, but instead of falling, Bobby chose the only path he knew. He wrote, quietly, without PR, without a staged comeback. He returned through music like a survivor stepping out of ruins, still clutching his guitar. Personal life. On stage, Bobby Bear was a wandering troubadour, his ballads wrapped in cigarette smoke and highway dust. But offstage, he was a lonely man, awkward with emotions, unable to hold on to the people he loved most. Jean Sterling, the woman who stood beside him for more than 60 years, wasn't a singer nor a fan. She was an ordinary girl expecting an ordinary marriage. Instead, she loved a man who was anything but ordinary. Bobby Bear, the restless vagabond forever caught between a tour bus, a studio far from home, or a half-finished song at midnight. In a rare interview, Jean once said, "Bobby can move the whole world with his quiet lyrics, but I, his wife, lived through long days without hearing a single word." Their marriage had no scandal, no public breakups, but peace was rare. Many nights, Jean sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the radio play her husband's new song, beautiful love ballads that moved millions. Yet she knew the tender words were never meant just for her. Bear was not loud in his sins. He didn't parade affairs or smash hotel rooms like other outlaws. His cruelty was softer but sharper, the endless absence. He could clap along with thousands of strangers in Texas, yet forget his own son's birthday. He could sing Detroit City with all the aching homesickness in the world, yet leave his wife to raise children and mend clothes alone. His son, Bobby Bear Jr., now a songwriter himself, once confessed, "Growing up with my father was like living with a ghost. He was in every song, every radio in the house, but he never once sat down and told me, 'I'm proud of you.'" Once, in a drunken moment, Bobby told a friend, "I can write music for the whole world, but I don't know how to write a simple apology to my wife." It was true. Jean kept them all, the scraps of paper he left behind, half-written letters, unfinished songs, things that could never make up for what was missing. He tried sometimes. He quit drinking, skipped a few tours, stayed home more often, but time had already carried the damage too far. The cracks would not heal. Jean stayed. She cared for him. But between them stretched a silence no words could cross. In old age, Bear lived simply. A wooden house on the edge of Nashville, a few worn guitars, a radio that only played Hank Williams, no parties, no headlines. He was the man who had once walked through glory, only to retreat into a world of guitars and old recordings. "I was never good at being a husband," Bear admitted in a 2018 interview. "I could make an audience cry, but the person I made cry the most was the woman sitting just a few steps away." The words came quietly, like everything else about him. No shouting, no excuses, just a confession. And maybe that was the truest thing Bobby Bear ever left behind, alongside his songs. Legacy and influence. In a world where the brightest lights often shine on the loudest names, Bobby Bear carved his place in country music history with a quiet voice, one deep enough to stir an entire generation. He was never the man to shout just to be heard. Bobby told stories, and because of that, people held their breath to listen. No roaring choruses, no glittering stage moves, just a guitar and words heavy enough to break a heart. Nashville once thought he was too quiet, too solemn to ever be a legend. But it was that very solemnity that earned him the title America's Saddest Storyteller. Because he didn't just sing about love, he sang of loneliness, of loss, of old men standing in bars, haunted by youth that had slipped away like rain in the wind. With Detroit City, he gave voice to the homesick laborer. With 500 miles away from home, he told the tale of a man clinging to memories after failure. With Streets of Baltimore, he captured the collapse of a marriage in just a few verses. These songs weren't just hits. They were diaries, written in the voices of millions of Americans. Bear didn't invent a style. He created a current that would shape the next wave of country artists. Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, David Allan Coe, even Johnny Cash in his later years. From him, they learned that a story didn't need fireworks. It only needed truth. More than that, Bobby Bear shattered Nashville's old belief that success demanded a formula. He refused producers who tried to control him. He rejected the hollow polish of the Nashville sound. In doing so, he paved the way for the outlaw movement, where artists were free to be themselves. In 2013, he returned to the Grand Ole Opry after nearly 30 years away. The crowd rose to their feet. Young musicians whispered, "Without him, we wouldn't have dared to be different." Rolling Stone called him the quiet pioneer of modern country. On stage, he never needed to raise his voice. Off stage, he never needed to claim credit. But every true artist knew. Bobby Bear's gravelly voice changed the way Nashville would write ballads forever. Present life. Just when you think you've heard every ballad, Bobby Bear's story remains another chapter. A quiet note, one that only those who truly need it can still hear. In 2025, Bobby Bear turned 90, an age when most have long left the spotlight. But for him, music has never faded. Instead of stopping, Bear chose to live gently, slowly, like an inner hymn still echoing in a restless world. He lives humbly in a wooden house on the outskirts of Nashville. Each morning he brews his coffee, turns on a simple radio, and sits quietly by the window. Strong but never showy, simple but never small. Bear doesn't need headlines. Those who visit him only hope to sit silently beside the shadow of a voice that once shook millions of hearts. Contemporary artists, Sturgill Simpson, Tyler Childers, Jason Isbell, all have spoken of Bobby Bare as a kind of elder, a living proof that country music doesn't need to shout to be true. In an interview before 2025, Bare only smiled and said, "I've sung for the whole world. If someone still wants to listen, then I'll still sing." That voice, tired but never diminished, still has the power to quiet a room, even with a single line. In 2013, he was finally inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, a late honor, but one worthy of a career built not on glitter, but on forgotten stories and songs woven out of longing. In 2018, he was invited back to the Grand Ole Opry, a belated recognition of Nashville's love for him. At 90, Bobby Bare doesn't appear often, but whenever he does, singing in a small room with a few guitars and a handful of faithful listeners, the silence deepens. Everyone knows this is no longer just music. This is his soul. He once said, "I don't know how long I'll live, but if music still makes you cry in silence, then that's something time can never take away." And truly, Bobby Bare has lived, is living, and will go on living in every note, in every face that lights up when his old guitar begins to sing. Country music endures because he is still here, silent, but never gone. At the end of the journey, when the lights have gone out, when the applause is only memory, Bobby Bare still stands. No glittering stage, no shining microphone, just an old guitar and a hushed, gravelly voice strong enough to make a generation pause and listen. Not because he was the best singer, not because he was the most successful, but because he was the most honest with his music and with himself. Bobby Bare never fought for fame. He fought to keep the soul of country intact. In a world that grew more artificial by the day, where music was polished, edited, and sold until it lost its heart, he is the last storyteller of a fading generation, a man who never used notes to boast, but to soothe. In every song, he left pieces of his scars, quiet, but more real than anything Nashville ever wrote. You can forget an artist with a dozen hit albums, but you will never forget the one who gave voice to your sorrow in a way no one else could. And if you've ever heard Detroit City in the still of the night, ever fought back tears with 500 miles away from home, ever seen yourself in Streets of Baltimore or Come Sundown, then, in some quiet moment, Bobby Bare was singing for your heart. At 90, he has nothing left to prove, because it's all there, in the music, in the silences, in the voice of a man who never lost himself, even if he lost the world around him. If this story touched you, hit like to keep real voices alive, and subscribe so we can continue to uncover the lives of those who gave their souls to America's music. And don't forget to leave a comment. Which Bobby Bare song will you never forget? Because your memories are what will keep this quiet flame burning forever.